Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today I am joined by a long-term friend of the show, Simon Sear. Simon, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks very much. Very good. Yeah, growing my mullet out in lockdown.
Well, you've grown it. I've lost it. So somewhere between, we've got a happy medium in there. This is one of the very first people we interviewed a few years ago now on the show. Lots happened in between. You've been involved in various different ventures. You're now independent innovation consultant. Tell everyone a little bit about your background, because it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've been in tech for about 25 years. When it wasn't called tech, it was called IT to start with. And I fell into that. I was a psychologist to start with. So I went to uni and then did a master's in business psychology. And I was all set in the mid-90s to kind of get into kind of business change and culture change and what that meant for everybody. But unfortunately, there was a recession in the mid-90s, and I was getting married, and the guy that ran the consultancy said, "Look, you're getting married. It's not going well with the culture stuff. Do you want to go and work in an IT program office?" And I went, and I said, "Well, he said, we'll get a bonus." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that ticked the box for the wedding." And then I said, "Well, what's a program office?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You'll work it out when you get there." And that was it. That was how I started in IT 25 years ago.
Amazing, isn't it? Sliding doors.
Yeah. And then, did various jobs, worked for big corporates, was a senior IT leader at the likes of BP and Duke Energy, and spent some time, three years at Enron, which was one of the most innovative companies going. Unfortunately, they were also innovative in the finance department as well.
I was going to say, was it your fault?
Yeah. But
fine when I left it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was great. I love working. I worked in the US there as well and spent a lot of time in the US. Yeah. And that's one thing, actually. I've always spent quite a bit of time working with American company as well. I quite like that kind of positive attitude that we'll take a problem and we can get after it. So and then in the last 10 years I've been a consultant. So a big chunk of that for a tech consultancy called BJSS, where I was chief innovation officer and a director there until recently, earlier in this year, where I left, and now I'm kind of doing my own thing around innovation, trying to work with senior leaders to kind of take some of that startup energy and ways of doing things, that sort of lean design thinking, agile stuff, bring it to bear in the corporate, kind of break down some of those kind of cultural challenges and ways of working and kind of mesh the two together. So that's kind of what I'm about.
It's innovation. Yeah, you recently started and launched this as well, and I think it's one of those sort of very interesting times to kick something off, isn't it? On one side, you've got the world shutting down to investment, but on the other side, there's no better time to innovate than the time right now, right? And we've seen great examples of that all over the place, particularly in the financial markets and such like. For what you think, and we've spoken about this a little bit before, it looks like digitalization is never going to see a more accelerated time, right? Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and where you think the opportunity is. And as someone who is a sort of out and out innovation guy, what are we expecting?
So I think that's a really interesting question. So if we unpack it a little bit there, so I think the first thing is about innovation. Quite often when we talk about innovation, we think about the moonshot, we think about futurism, we think about big, bold steps and things that technology is going to enable. And that kind of isn't most of innovation, actually, especially within big organizations. It's about how do you generate new revenue or generate increased productivity through automation, through applying technologies. A really brilliant example of this is Lemonade, which is an insurance company out of New York that I've recently did a video about. It was a case study. And what they've done is they've created a fantastic customer experience using chatbots that are onboarding clients. They're running your claims in the background. They're automating most of the process that you find in an insurance company. And so they've got such efficiency in the way they do things by applying technology. But the fundamental business model is insurance. They're not revolutionizing insurance. They're just applying technology to automate as much as possible and to get that personalized self-service experience. And that technology is there and everybody can do it. And so to the second part of your question, I think what we're going to see now coming out of this crisis is that a lot of organizations thinking like that. They think, how do we apply these digital technologies that are available to revolutionize our business or to transform our business to drive out new productivity gains or better customer experiences. So I think we're going to see a lot of kind of acceleration in that space. I mean, we've already seen the kind of classic ones within the kind of crisis management itself. So a lot of people have been on a cloud journey, and we're seeing that kind of speed up a bit. And then the remote working, you know, obviously we'll see that, and we'll see those changes. But I think some of the more interesting ones seem to be as well around, like if you look at the NHS and the use of data, and they quickly changed data privacy rules, like almost like they pivoted within 24 hours around what could be used in terms of predictive analytics and patient care, because there was an urgent need to fight the crisis. You know, I think it's this wonderful quote that says, you know, there's like 20 years of innovation happened in 2 weeks within the NHS around its data space. So I think the penny might drop in some of those cases where we go, actually, you know what, we don't need to do 20 years worth of process or months and months. You know, we can do things a lot quicker. So I think as well as the technology and the use cases, there'll be this kind of cultural mental shift as well. I mean, one example was in the you know, the home space. How many of us have got elderly folks that started using you know, Tesco's or Sainsbury's or Ocado delivery that they weren't doing before, because they always, yeah, that's not how we do things. They used to go to the supermarket, but now they're like, oh, actually, it's nothing to be frightened of. It's quite nice, actually. You know, guy turns up on Thursday at 6 o'clock and got all my shopping for me.
Yeah, plus a whole load of Zoom and FaceTime calls seeing the top of someone's head. Seems to have been one of those things has been a real feature of it. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's so often innovation takes a lot of time to break things down. There's a lot of traditional thinking, there's a lot of fear around things, and this has been one of the first times ever where people have really been forced to accelerate that. And you know, I think it's going to be an amazing legacy for people to recognise that when you have to take the plunge like this, things can, the world can still turn. You mentioned work from home there. It's been a common theme in conversations that we've been having all the way through, and something that people have resisted for a long time. And all of a sudden you're saying, right, okay, there can be some benefits to it for individuals, for well-being, for productivity, for all sorts of different things. And a number of people I've been talking to had always been quite anti it, myself included, who are suddenly realizing actually that there's something here which we could be onto something here, moving further forward. Yeah. I remember when we first spoke on this show, I think maybe 3-4, I dread to think how long ago it was now, but this is when you were sort of really ringing the bell for AI and everything within. I know that's been a sort of pet project for you, and something which you spent a lot of time really focusing in on. Are you surprised at the lack of development? Because I still think, whilst there's been progress, it's not been as seismic as I think some people were thinking. Is that fair? Firstly, would you say that's fair to say? And secondly, do you think what's been the sort of prohibitors to really seeing day-to-day takeoff of something that can be so beneficial?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think some of it is about the hype. The hype did definitely get out of hand. And so I think probably last year was the peak of that. We saw a lot of that. And again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. I think a lot of it was because we imagined these all-knowing robots, that were going to help us, transform, and that's what it was, going to be like, this sort of future we were creating. But the reality is it's not. On the front end, as you say, you've got a lot of self-service, you've got a lot of bots, you've got intelligent bots, you've got virtual assistants. That has we've seen a lot of uptake on that. You go to any kind of retailer or any kind of service-based organization, those bots and those things are there. And so you're seeing those productivity gains through, maybe call centers being reduced in size, a lot of self-service in terms of people, being able to take action themselves. And then I think the other side of it is obviously around data. That's always been a problem and a challenge of how do you get that data together. I mean, I'm hopeful that we'll get a lot more data science, data analytics, kind of positive results, I guess, coming out of this period, because that's been a challenge as well, especially in big corporates, is that they've still struggled with this, with having islands of data and not being able to pull that data together. And then on top of that, having very rigid, structured corporate ways of doing things that means it takes forever. You know, they think, right, we've got to design a whole data model. We've got to put all the data in a data lake, and then we'll find out what the value is, rather than working backwards, which is, if you do it in a much more kind of lean design thinking way, you say, right, okay, what's the data we've got? Let's experiment with it. Let's play with it. Let's be creative with it. And that suits data science much better than the kind of rigid, structured, classic corporate ways of managing data. So I'm hopeful that in this period, or coming out of this period, we'll see people relaxing a little bit about the need to kind of have that big bureaucratic data, and they'll actually start experimenting a bit more with it, and we'll see some more AI stuff coming out of it in that space. Then the kind of final third piece is automation. You know, and we've seen you know, a lot of automation, you know, the likes of, you know, people like Blue Prism and, you know, UiPath and people doing a lot of that stuff already. I think we'll start to see more of that, because companies have realized they've got a lot of people in back office. They've got a lot of people in the kind of operation side of the business that can be automated. So I think we'll start to see a lot of that going forward as well.
I think that's probably always been one of the sort of fears that's held it back a little bit. I mean, you mentioned there people being replaced effectively, which is never a good PR for new innovation, other than to the minor few at the top. But then when you look at it, actually, it's sort of, I've always seen it more of as a repatriation of skills, because, you know, one of the biggest dearths of skill in the UK, I would say, certainly, and probably globally, is you know, data scientists, as you talked about. And as we've advanced so quickly with AI in various areas, you know, you're talking about experts who've got 18 months worth of experience, you know, with a product, which is rapidly badging someone an expert with something that's evolving so quickly. What with that sort of challenge, and you know, talent being probably one of the sole inhibitors to the advance and the march of you know, AI and data technology, how can that be improved? How do we grow out of this, and how do we make sure that that's something which sort of I guess reconstitutes what talent looks like at the moment?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think, you know, a lot of organizations were already, you know, facing up to that challenge, or trying to face up to that challenge. I mean, it's interesting you said about the, you know, kind of repatriation of people from one thing to another thing, and retraining and everything. I had a really interesting conversation with somebody once, which was about that, and we got to talking and saying, okay, so we can automate a lot of the back office and maybe invoicing and, you know, reconciliation and credit and stuff. And when we had that kind of very positive attitude, which was like, yeah, and we can reskill these people, and they can do something more creative and add more value to the organization. But then you kind of think, but do they want that? Does Marjorie, who's done invoicing for 10 years and comes in at 8:30 and leaves at 5:30, and that's what she does she want to do something new? You know, and you kind of think, we assume she does, because we do, because we love change and we love doing these things. But there are a lot of people who are kind of fearful of the change, or fearful of doing something else, or are actually quite satisfied with doing that in a non-cognitive challenging way, because they've got other parts of their life, like, I don't know, choir or kids, or, you know, that is challenging. And so I think we need to be thoughtful about it, and that for me is something that I think this period is going to be a big challenge for human society in general, really, which is, as we automate a lot more stuff, as technology becomes more pervasive, and AI, for example, becomes the dominant technology, what do we do, and how do we feel about ourselves as a human race? Because the only thing that we've got that technology or hasn't got, or you know, heavy automation hasn't got, is consciousness. And then you say, well, what is it? If you unpack that, you say, what is consciousness? The consciousness is love, it's empathy, it's creativity, it's social interaction, you know, things that we've missed during this crisis, you know, being locked down in our houses. And so I've got this sense that in the next decade, we're almost going to enter a new period of enlightenment, or a renaissance of our generation, which is a bit of soul searching of who we are, who do we want to be, what makes us happy, what do we do for work? You know, the universal credit, I think, is a bad idea, because it, you know, we've seen how the mental scars of people not doing things and just milling about over the last couple of months. But I really do think that with technology, we are going to see this supercharged kind of digital transformation of businesses, and we do need to think about how we're going to skill people, what it means to be human, what do we do.
Yeah, I think this human element is such an important part of it, and we've gone deep there, haven't we?
We've gone really deep,
with your psychology background coming back into it. But I think it's the crux of so much of this is around there. That I know we've spoken about this in the past, and this sort of people have always spoken for a long time about the automation of the recruitment industry, as for example. And what it is, and I've been talking about this is for a long time, is man and machine working together. But this is a classic sort of situation where we are seeing two things that need to work in harmony together to really get the best out of both worlds. That humans adapting to everything that AI can bring, and bringing that sort of unbelievable customer experience that we're able to create from it, is irrelevant if you haven't got the human touch to be able to sort of work alongside that and make the most of it. In our industry, the sort of persuasion and human element is what you're paid for. It's the consulting. It just brings out the real skill of it. So the skill of our job is amplified to actually really focus on the consulting element of it all. It's been a bit of a misnomer for many years, recruitment consultant. It's just been a sort of badge that you put onto it. And I think that will be the evolution. From what you're saying there, it's the same wherever it goes. This is about a man and machine working in harmony to maximize the opportunity of everything we're talking about. And from this sort of period, I think there's a great opportunity to see people develop that and to really embrace those sort of things, to see this not as a threat, to not live in fear of change, but to work out how we can pivot humanity, if that's not too big a word, to really work out the best route forward for all this.
I think so. I think definitely there are many sectors of areas that, like yours, you think healthcare is a classic, right? So we've done it for decades and hundreds of years probably. The more technology that a doctor has or a nurse has, the better they can provide that healthcare service to you. And I think we'll see that in a lot of service-based sectors. But there are some things that are just going to be automated, and there are no people involved in it. And I think for me, the thing about the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, is that there's how do we value creativity? How do we value people coming up with new things, being entrepreneurial, coming up with new ideas, starting new things? And I think back into if you look at the post-war, so post World War II, there was a period from 1945 to the early 70s, which was the golden age of capitalism. There was a lot of creativity. They were coming out of a terrible time in wartime, but they did a couple of things. One is they embraced innovation. They embraced kind of doing new things. They embraced modernism, and you look at whether you love it or hate it, but the Royal Festival Hall and the South Bank, and it all came out of that period. But they took risks as well. They took risks. They were willing, and you could say, well, they were coming from very low, so they didn't have a lot to lose. A lot of people. But it was a sense of you can almost imagine being a teenager in the 50s and the 60s, and that sense that we've got of that time is that there was a lot of exploration about what it meant to be human, a person, a rock and roll star, and then we saw it again in the 70s. In the UK in particular, we had a lot of art schools, and we had people going to art schools, and you can argue that we quite possibly had the golden age of music, of punk and of rock, and lots of things came out of it, and then movies and films and theatre, and we had this explosion of creativity and businesses and everything that went with it. And I just get the sense that we're kind of almost going to go into one of those periods, and I don't quite know what it looks like yet. But as we automate everything and we begin to let go of needing to have Marjorie's job or Marjorie have her job, there's well, what's next, and what do we value? We've spent the last 20 years kind of drumming into our kids about STEM, and you've got to have science, maths, and we devalued the art schools. We devalued a lot of the creativity, the unconsciousness, that makes us human. And it's like, well, how do we get back to that? How do we kind of tap into that and kind of unlock the entrepreneurial spirit, the creativity, the risk taking, and for me, I think this is a great time to do that.
This is about there's a massive subject on this, isn't it? About what's fit for purpose in education, and I've been banging this drum for a long time. I think there has been, if you look at where innovation has happened, education is probably the area where we've seen the least of it. And the curriculums that we're talking about now are almost identical to the curriculums 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. And how fit for work, when we talk, particularly when we, 2008 onwards, and that's the 5-year period after the crash, when we were talking about youth unemployment being as high as it was, there was very, very little change to how people were getting work ready, and we saw a massive naivety in how young people were coming into work. 5 years on, I think that started to evolve very nicely, and we saw people sort of becoming very creative. And that's where you sort of saw a big rise in digital brands and young entrepreneurs and everything like that. But again, were people in education being taught for that? Were they teaching it themselves? Was YouTube effectively becoming the real tutor of all this stuff?
Yeah.
And I think this whole concept at the moment. I mean, look, we've spoken about psychology. Let's move on to politics a little bit. I think there's some very interesting stuff that's very vitally important to get right at the moment, with regards to a government that probably for the last few years has been very, very progressive to entrepreneurialism and to investment in technology and trying to keep Britain at the very forefront of tech innovation. This is an opportunity for that to really take hold and for Britain to push itself to the fore. And I think the Chancellor's been doing a fair amount to do that. What's your take as someone who lives and breathes innovation about what we've seen from a government level to support that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that is one of the key things, is that government support. And again, if you go back to that golden age of capitalism just after the war, that's when they had a lot of funds. It's almost like a government fund of investment, and that's where 3i came from. And that's the sort of bold moves I think they need to make now, is that kind of investments and funds being available, partnering with private companies, with investment companies, and making those funds available to people to start their own businesses, to try out new things. And I think also, though, that we need some kind of guidance around it, or frameworks of supporting each other, because being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of people, I think you speak to them and have a great idea, and they're smart and they're bubbly and they wanted to get on and do something. But if you look at all the evidence, the number one characteristic of whether you're driving innovation and you're an entrepreneur, or you're an entrepreneur and you're building your own business, is grit and determination. And to have that grit and determination is like, you get knocked down, you get back up, you start doing something, nobody buys it, and you pivot and you do something else. That is the number one characteristic, the number one factor that determines success or failure within an entrepreneur. And that also requires support, love, just being able to sit there and have a coffee or a beer and listen to somebody moaning at you, and then you think, actually, I feel all right now. I'm gonna have another go. So I think we've all been there, right? There's lots of,
especially through this period.
Yeah, exactly. There's money and funding and availability, and then there's process and network, but there's also that human element again, I think, of supporting people and encouraging people. And some people might be fearful. It's like, I'm going to hold your hand through this. We can get through it, I think. So I think government does have a role to play in it, but I think it's a wider societal thing as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. There's an interesting word that I've become sort of increasingly fascinated with at the moment, and it's got people there who will talk in a positive light about it, and there's people there who will talk in a less positive. And I had this conversation just yesterday with Harrington Starr, who's on the show, and I was keen to get his view as someone who's been a really successful serial entrepreneur. With you, again, really interesting background onto this, and I think I know where your stand on it is. That quite often pivot as a word is seen as a dirty word. It means you flunked and your business plan was wrong at the start. And there's people there who will talk about, if you were pivoting your business, you've gone with the wrong plan at the start. And then there's people who've got a much more progressive view of pivoting as effectively an essential part of the entrepreneur's handbook. And I guess it sort of goes into the whole concept of marginal gains and such like, and constant evolution and 1%ers and all this sort of thing. Which side of the pivot fence do you sit?
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, you pivot all the time. I mean, if you
Yeah,
don't, I think if you're married to a course of action and you won't deviate, then that's madness in my book. I mean,
yeah,
everyone pivots. Whether you're, as I say, you're an entrepreneur within an organization. You should have everybody. I think for me, there's basic stuff, which is you have a mission. What is your mission? And your mission might be an entrepreneurial one where you're thinking about, creating a new business, a new online business, or a new taxi cab firm called Uber, whatever it is, but you've got a mission. That's where you're going to get to. And the same if you're in a big corporate as well, is what's your mission? Okay, well, I want to take out 10% of the cost of back office. And you kind of roughly know how you're going to do it, but it's not until you start and you start experimenting and the rubber really hits the road, you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And the other thing is you never know all the answers when you start. So you kind of have a rough idea, but then you think, actually, I've just found out that my assumptions about that customer segment weren't right. So if you don't have the ability to pivot at that point and learn and go, you know what, okay, but if I just tinker this bit here, or if I do this, or I repackage it this way, or I go for a different country, an adjacent market, or you for me, if you couldn't do that, that would be bonkers, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm 100% in the pivot camp. Although I do think that there's terms and conditions that apply to that, because there are certain people who just sort of fly in from it, from one thing to the next without too much foresight. But this is about, for me, this is about constant evolution. Kaizen is one of our core values as a business, and that continuous improvement model, I think, is probably where we need to look at with all of this.
And that for me is comes back to that being mission driven. So what is your mission? And if you're a leader within an organization, you need to agree with people what the mission is or what their mission is, and then give them the space to get to that. And absolutely, I think judging the outcomes of that mission is success or failure. And that for me is, because you're right, you do get people that flip flop, or they kind of change their mind and go off and follow a nice shiny thing somewhere else. But for me, that's not pivoting about your mission. That's just slightly distracted by something new and shiny. And I think that's the thing. When I work with a lot of corporates, and when they think about innovation or they think about transformation, or they're actually kind of on the journey, a lot of the KPIs they use are about how many ideas have we got going into a hopper, how many ideas have been shortlisted, how many have been piloted, how many are going through to realization. But if you are an entrepreneur, you're not thinking like that at all. You're thinking, right, have I got a customer base? Am I earning any money? Have I got cash coming in? How much margin am I making? What's my utilization? You're thinking of a lot of different. This is, and one of the techniques that I often use with corporates is, imagine it is your business and your mortgage is on the line. What would be in your minimum viable product versus this process, this hopper we've got that's taking 3 months to get anything anywhere? What would you genuinely do if that was your mission, was to get bums on seats or revenue or cash, and the mindset is completely different.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think there's a lot of people who sort of sit there. I think back to, and it's a question I ask a lot in the office with hiring as a decision. If it was your money, would you be making that sort of play? And look, we're by no means a massive corporate, but I still think it's, you want people to be thinking, every single person throughout every organization should be thinking as an owner. And I think when you haven't got people who are thinking as an owner, I think you've got a very different sort of set of decision making that comes through. And I think that how this time can sort of prompt people to be thinking that, where everyone's sort of working individually and away from the structure of the office. I think you're probably seeing a lot more ownership that comes into it, and a lot more almost entrepreneurial flair to come out of it. And that's what I want to see as one of the big positives to come out of this negative. And the whole theme of the series and the questions we've been having all the way through this have been saying, like, this is a horrible, horrible situation. It's got people in terrible situations all over the world. But so for me, the responsibility for that has to then say, right, let's make it a better world afterwards, and let's take positives away from what we've learned through this period. And I think if one of the things that can be the legacy of it is how people adopt and adapt to new technology, and how people think in a different way about certain problems, I think that would be a massive plus point to come out of this.
Yeah.
What else do you see as you know, if we're looking ahead and saying, you know, looking back on this, sorry, in 2-3 years, and saying this is what we see as some of the big plus points for, you know, from that time, some of the things that have helped shape humanity. What do you think that will look like?
Well, I think a big thing for me is the environment. I think, you know, when we saw those graphic pictures of cities and the nitrous oxides, you know, the kind of shrinking rapidly. I mean, it just shows you how we pollute, you know, continually across the, you know, and I live in inner London, and I think it was the first time I can remember seeing the stars, because the skies were clear. And you know, we'd get on a bike and ride to Buckingham Palace and the Mall for our daily exercise and stuff, and it was fantastic. You know, it was a really nice environment when it didn't have the cars, the traffic, the pollution. And then I think if you scale that up on a global basis, you think, well, actually, there's something in that. I mean, we've surely all got to realise that we're accountable for this, and you know, we've got to do something about it. So I think if there's something about technology and again creating business in that space, and maybe the government, as we said earlier, is making funds available for people to you know, come up with creative solutions that aren't just the big wind farms or the solar but they're actually, you know, micro kind of businesses and helping in that space. I think, you know, the globalization is a fantastic thing that we can all get strawberries in December, but actually, do you know what? Yeah, maybe we do need to think more deeply about the supply chain, and we do think more deeply about where our produce is coming from and the miles it travels, etc. And so for me, I think that would be a big thing. And then the other thing I think is the kind of human stuff as well, the human interactions, because we have been on this kind of unchecked journey towards automation that as we said earlier, is going to get supercharged. It's going to go even faster. And it's that, what is that human care aspect of it? What is it that, you know, I now know all the neighbours in my street. It's not a very long street, but I now know all the neighbours in my street. Whereas before lockdown, I knew half of them, you know, and it's great. And you say hi, and, you know, and everybody knows the dog, and you think that, I love that. That's a really good outcome of this. It's like, well, how do we continue to foster that and to value that, and the Zoom calls or the Skype calls with grandma, you know, even if it is, as we said earlier, from the nose up, you know. It's environment one thing, and human is the other thing. I think
the human thing is absolutely right. There's been, you know, from you know, clapping for carers to people getting to know their neighbours a little bit more, to local shops and everything that I love about, and I've always loved about that sort of side of things. Anyway, I think there's so many good positives to, you know, to take on, and it will be so tempting just to sort of very quickly revert to norm, and revert to type. There'll be a lot there to say, look, everyone gets back into, you know, the same routines as they always did, best intentions, and then life gets in the way again. And I think, you know, if I think about a lot of things we've been doing, you know, we've been busy rather than really sort of and too busy to almost impact and improve the business in areas that we wanted to do. And I think that's the same for everything. And when life does get busy again, I think there's a real significant and importance and responsibility, as you say, to make sure that we're keeping all the good parts of this, which have been great. And
I mean, I think one of the interesting things, I don't know whether you've felt this as well, is a lot of people have, who I've spoken to, which is, yeah, you end up having Zoom calls or Teams or Skype or whatever your flavour is, you know, literally all day, and you feel exhausted at the end of the day.
Literally just had that conversation about 5 minutes before we did this.
I mean, it is exhausting. And then you think, well, what do I do normally? And you go, well, actually, when I go to work, to an office with other people, I don't work all day. You know, I take a break and I go for a coffee, or I'm still chatting to somebody, but we're talking about their family or their problem or their project or their hobby or their something. And so we're mixing it up all the time in that kind of human interaction. Whereas now we're like, right, call to call to call, right, just nip to the loo, and, you know, and it is, it's not just the screen time. I think it's just the lack of human.
Well, it's those
personal stuff.
Those sort of we've heard it. It's the blurred lines between work life and home life, isn't it? And the discipline that's needed around that. That, I mean, I'm down in here at sort of 6:30 in the morning, and I very rarely pop out until sort of 7-8 o'clock at night, and within that, it's either constantly on the phone or it's constantly on here on Zooms. And I think there's one day where it was over 11 hours worth of Zooming in a day, and it is I've been getting out there and having dinner and then sat on the sofa and falling asleep halfway through a TV show. There's a lot you learn about everything, isn't there, over the period, about getting it right, trial and error.
And also, you think about commuting, and a lot of people that live in the suburbs of London and come into central London, probably for a lot of people, that 3/4 of an hour on a train is like meditation, isn't it? They read a book or listen to the radio or read a paper or just do nothing, look out the window because they've had a busy day, and crack open a gin and tonic. I don't know, but it's a space.
I always love those. The bottle, the small bottle of wine and the plastic glass, and I always think that's a bad day.
I've had a few of those. But and kind of maybe we forget that actually there's a lot of things we do that aren't necessarily efficient, but they keep us balanced, I think.
No, I absolutely agree. Simon, I've just seen the time on this, and I could be having this conversation. It seems like we started 5 minutes ago, and we've already nailed a long time on it. We should definitely carry this on and offline, and we should also carry it on as a second follow up, because I think there's so much interesting stuff. I always enjoy a conversation with you, because there's just such different thinking around so much of things, and I guess that's why you're doing what you're doing. Going back to you and where you can add value and who you're looking to work with at the moment, let's focus on that, because there'll be people here who are hearing some of the things you're saying who are stuck with innovation. Who should be talking to you? What value can you give them, and how do they get in touch with you?
Thank you. Is it plug time? So you can get on, in contact with me on LinkedIn. I've got a YouTube channel as well. Just search for Simon Sear and you'll find me on there. And I've just started putting
worth a watch as well.
Thank you, Toby. I've just started putting content up there. So lots of the things we talked about today, and it's all free and no obligations. If you want to check it out, that would be appreciated. But I help senior leaders really think about innovation and how they bring some of that entrepreneurial startup spirit, doing things quickly, doing things in a lean way, experimenting, and all value driven, mission driven. I've been doing it for a number of years. I've worked in big organizations. I'm not just purporting that we take the startup mentality and put it in a big organization. I do understand how those big corporates work. That's kind of me in a nutshell, I think.
Well, it sounds like people should be reaching out to you. Please do, if you're watching here and you like what you've heard from Simon. It will be a conversation well spent. Simon, listen, great speaking to you. Thanks so much for sharing all that insight. And we got quite deep at various different stages. Enjoyed it.
It's thought-provoking.
Absolutely. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.